Hello and welcome to another edition of Math, Music, and More. Today we're going back to music for a little while, as you can probably tell, and I'm going to be covering a lot of ground, just focusing on first discerning melodies, again using scales through solfege, then how we can start thinking about stacking chords onto those notes, but I'm going to show you this simplistic but wrong way. And then through that, I'm going to introduce you to secondary dominants and just how powerful they can be. The video is probably going to be way too long. I have no idea how this is going to go, so I'm going to try to take just one snippet of a song that you might know. So we'll start in C, because C is the easiest of keys. And bum, the melody starts on that note C. Ground control to major tom. Ground control to major tom. Check ignition and may God's love be with you. That's not the first verse, but so what? We're not focused on the words. So what do you think those notes would be? Well, if we think of a C scale, there's so few actual discernible pitches that I was just singing, it's actually pretty easy. C, 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 D, C, B, D, C, D, C, D, C, D, C, D, C, D, D. And now we can think of chords. Let's go to that next step. The next step is, well, what kind of chords could work? Well, it's always easiest to think of root position, right? And if you think of C, let's go ahead and just play all the triads so you can hear them. The one chord is just C, E, G. The two chord, you just shift your hand up a whole step. D, F, A, which is a D minor chord. Then you shift again up a whole step to the three chord. E, G, B. Then a half step up to the four chord, the subdominant. F, A, C. Then a whole step up to the dominant chord, the G chord, or the five chord. G, B, D. And then the sixth chord, which is the relative minor. A, C, E. And then the seven chord, which is diminished. It's a B triad. B, D, F. And then you're back to C. So let's first try doing everything in just root position. So if we started the melody with a C, remember? Well, then the first chord would be a C chord. Sorry. Hey, that sounds right. Now let's do a root position on a B, which would be the seven chord. That sounds interesting, but it doesn't quite sound right. Let's try it again. No. So maybe it's not a B chord in root position, which is a diminished chord, right? B, D, F. Maybe we can think of inversions. Maybe it's the dominant chord, the G chord, where the B is the third. So let's try that. Sounds pretty, but that doesn't sound right either. Gosh, what else could it be? Well, let's see. We tried it in root position. We tried it as the third. Therefore, we now have to try it as the fifth. Well, for what chord would B be the fifth? It would be E minor in the key of C. So let's see if that would work. Again, pretty, but doesn't work. There must be something else going on. And this is where this critical concept comes into play, which can make music so dynamic, at least harmonically. And that is the notion of a secondary dominant. What that word implies is that the dominant that you're playing is not the dominant of the key that you're in, but in a relative key. So for example, if we are in the key of C, the dominant is just the five chord, and then back. You can do a different right? That's just the five, the dominant. But what if I were to take the five of the five? Let's think that through. If the five chord is G, then the five would be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 would be a D chord. And then you say, oh, but we already played that before. Right? Because in the key of C, it would just be D, F, A. But no, in the key of G, because we're saying it's the five of five, it would actually be an F sharp. So let's hear how those two chords sound next to each other. That's the first secondary dominant that I'm introducing you to. And there are lots of other secondary dominants. Like, remember how we talked about the relative minor? You could go from C to the 6th chord. Well, what would be the dominant chord of A minor? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. It always has to be a major chord, the dominant chord. That's E, G sharp, B. So that's different than in the C major, in the key of C major, the 3 chord, which is E, G natural, B. This is different. It adds a G sharp to be able to resolve to that A minor chord. Now that's the interesting chord, because remember the notes that I just mentioned, E, G sharp, B. B is that note that comes up in this very melody from David Bowie. Then back. We'll throw in the 7th. And then it resolves to the minor chord. I threw in another secondary dominant there, but let's just go back to that E major chord. C, 2, I would do in the first inversion and as a 7 chord. Notice what I did there in the end. I'll set you up for that additional secondary dominant chord that I was just mentioning. As we said, this E chord is the dominant of A minor. And sure enough, in the second part of the phrase, put your protein pills, it did resolve to the A minor. Put your protein pills. Here I'm playing a C chord again, but in second inversion. So it's G, C, E. And then boom, boom. Has that fantastic little chromatic slip in the bass line, which just happens to be that F sharp of the D chord we were mentioning before. And if you throw in the C natural, it becomes the 5 chord of G major. So David Bowie, in the very first part of the piece, is already in the 2nd chord, hitting you with a secondary dominant. This is why he's so brilliant. He sets you up with a major chord, and the very next chord already tugs you away, and then he brings you back, and he tugs you away, and then he resolves it. And then he tugs you yet away again with a new secondary dominant. Wow, I'm already at 8 minutes, so I gotta stop now. We'll spend much more time on secondary dominants and how brilliant they are in this harmonic dynamism that they bring to any kind of piece. But I hope that was helpful. And maybe later we'll go through the entire song, because there's also something else that he does very interesting. This is just kind of a segue or a cliffhanger for next time. He actually goes to the subdominant, which is of course the F major chord, and then he toggles back and forth between F major and F minor, sort of unpredictably. And it again creates this sort of ethereal dynamism, in my opinion. Anyway, hope you liked it. Like and subscribe. Very interested in your comments and your reactions. Take care, everyone.